Ooh, baby, it's cold outside. I'm going to cover 5 mistakes to avoid if you want to fire up your grill and enjoy it all winter long. Okay, first issue to cover is mold. Now, ceramics by nature is a porous material. Part of the reason that they turn out things so good like chicken, help retain lots of moisture, can be a little bit of our undoing in the winter months if you aren't using your grill frequently enough. So there's a couple things you can do to prevent mold in the first place, and if you have mold, how to get rid of it. So first, starting with preventing mold, you have 2 options here. One, continue to use your grill all year long, and this typically will not become an issue. But if you happen to find yourself in the unusual circumstances where you have got some mold, what you can do to prevent this from happening in the first place is, instead of leaving your grill latched like this with your top vents sealed up, is go ahead after it's cooled off and the fire has been extinguished, leave your airlift hinge unlatched. This is actually going to solve another problem that we'll cover in a second, as well as help preserve our gasket bounce. This is something that used to be in the original Kamado Joe manual, and I think it's a great tip. It's just something I made habit many years ago, and I encourage anybody on the fence whether to leave it latched or leave it open. Not only will it help preserve our gasket, but this will also help prevent humidity and moisture being stuck inside. So just go ahead, open your airlift hinge, open your top vent and your bottom vent if you don't have an airlift hinge, in order to get a little bit of extra air circulation. And this is particularly important if you use a cover versus an open air installation like what I am here under my pergola. Before we move into mistake number 2, if you happen to be in the situation where you didn't do this and you have mold built up, this is a really easy fix. We're going to do something called a clean burn. Now, depending on what you're after here for a clean burn, but mold is an organic matter. It does not take much to kill this. So temperatures like a steak, which I've just seared here, you can even see my dome starting to get clean. I was cleaning the soapstone. That can be achieved at 550 to 650 degrees Fahrenheit, and you will absolutely eradicate any evidence of mold in your grill. You don't need to go to nuclear temperatures. I get asked all the time how to do that. I did a video a couple years back if you want to make the ceramic good as new, but there are risks associated with that, particularly in winter when there's cold ambient temperatures and really high temperatures inside your grill. So something like 550 to 650 degrees Fahrenheit will be more than enough to eradicate the mold from your grill, and you can get on cooking with whatever you have in store. On to mistake number 2. I mentioned a cover in mistake number 1. That leads directly into mistake number 2, particularly if you don't have a cover, and that is our dome freezing to our base. And so the mistake here is panicking and just trying to use brute force to break that open. Imagine if, when you're a kid and you did the friends challenge you to lick a cold pole or something like that, and your tongue now is frozen to the pole. The last thing that you want to do here is brute force and just tear away at that. That's going to cause some damage. The same is true if your dome happens to be frozen to your lower gaskets. This happens as these gaskets are felt in the case of my Series 1, or the mesh gasket on my Series 2, Series 3 grills. And if these get wet from maybe freezing rainstorm, if they're not covered, rain or snow that's melted, and then the temperature drops again, if these get wet and they're sitting sealed to one another, another reason to leave your air latch hinge open, as it will help make sure that the gasket material doesn't have the opportunity to freeze to itself. But if that's already something that you could have done and didn't already do, and your gasket is frozen together, let me show you how to quickly and easily unstick this without using the brute force method, which will cause that gasket to tear and rip off the sealant that is adhering it to your dome or your base. And that's only going to create some more work and frustration to glue it back on there before you're able to use your grill. If you find yourself in this situation, it's an easy fix. All you need is a match or a fire starter, as well as a starter cube. And what we're going to do is open our bottom draft vent, open our top control tower. If it's frozen as well, I'll cover that in my next mistake. But assuming that you're able to still use the top control tower top and get a little bit of airflow in there, go ahead and open that up. And what we're going to do is place one of these fire starters in the bottom ash drawer, light it, and walk away. And in about 10 minutes, this will build enough heat to melt the ice that is causing our gasket, whether it's the mesh gasket or the felt gasket. This works just as well. This will provide enough heat to melt the ice that is causing your dome to be stuck to one another. So if you are having one of those days where it seems everything's going wrong, do not make it worse by committing this next mistake. So take our time. So if we had our dome frozen to our base, we're going to be able to unfreeze it with that fire starter trick. We can get enough air if our top vent is also frozen that we don't need it open for the circulation. We will be able to melt it with the heat with the vent being open before we start to work on this. If this was completely frozen onto the top of our dome, what we don't want to be doing is putting any side force if this was really difficult to move. As you can see, this is just a little ceramic hood, and by putting lots of lateral force side to side or front to back, we can make things much worse by breaking the top of this fragile component right off. I see this on Facebook groups all the time where people try and use a lot of lateral force. We can cause some damage. Instead, we want to let the heat build up and naturally start to soften this so that we can regain natural control of either our daisy wheel or our control tower top. Now, let's talk about prevention, and once the fire has done its work and melted this so that we can actually start to navigate it, how to remove it safely if you're not able to slide it off, as simple as what I was able to do on my daisy wheel right here. So once the dome issue is fixed and you have operation and are able to open and close your dome, the way to get this off without side force is to get something like a stick, or I've used a piece of wood in the past, and if we need to, tap gently upwards and lift this off the top of the dome rather than doing side to side. That'll allow us to get it off for maybe something like cleaning. And that cleaning feeds directly into point number 2. Grease and fats, just like in the summer, our oily surfaces, they get a lot thicker and cooler, and they stick much more aggressively in the sub-freezing temperatures than they do in the summer. And that can make this issue seem like it's frozen, when actually it could just be that really thick, fatty sludge compounds causing our control tower top or our daisy wheel to stick. And so a best practice here, particularly in winter if you're using your grill often, is after a cook and everything is moving nice, just like when your car engine is warm and the oil is flowing freely and you can rev it out, versus when you don't want to do that on a very cold engine, is get a paper towel after you're done your cook, before you do your shutdown procedure. Swing open your control tower top, wipe off any fatty oils from the base underneath the top as well as in the slide operation, and that'll just help prevent this issue from ever popping up, and it won't be something that you encounter all winter long. You can see that I have this stored in my Big Joe for a good reason. If you're not in a covered area like I am, or you don't have a cover, the last thing that we want to do is just leave these outside in the bottom of our grill cart. Our grill cart is a really handy way of storing things. If you have a Series 3 Classic or Big Joe, you can side your deflector plates and your slow roller right underneath of your grill, which works great all year round, except when they get wet and there's ice and snow attached to these. The moisture in the ceramic does not expand at the same level as the humidity or the moisture from rain, snow, and slush, and this is what causes ceramic deflector stones to crack. So if you've left these outside and they've gotten wet, the worst thing that we could do is fire up our grill for something hot and fast, maybe like a pizza, and put these ceramics with moisture on them directly in our grill. If this happens and you notice it, it happens, you know, you leave your deflectors out, you don't know it's going to snow, don't know it's going to rain, and then you realize the next day that you've committed a potential error here in terms of being able to use your grill, you can go ahead and throw these in the oven at a low temperature, 150 to 200 degrees Fahrenheit, or if you have the time, you can do this in your grill and just let them sit for an hour or two at really low temperatures before we start to ramp up the heat. That will give the time for very gentle heat to evaporate the moisture out of the ceramic and get these back to their natural state so we can use them as intended under normal operating circumstances. Speaking of ceramic, that leads me into my fifth and final mistake before I get into 5 advantages. All this negativity in terms of mistakes and issues to avoid, but trust me, there are some advantages to grilling and smoking in the winter weather as well. But the last one is the outer ceramics themselves. Now, I was worried about this a long time ago. You go back about 15 years ago when I had a couple big green eggs to Kamado Joe's. I read about it in the forums all the time, the concern of cracking ceramic. And when I had an opportunity to borrow a friend's, it's destroyed, a warranty replacement base, I wanted to see for myself just how easy or hard these are to crack. And the spoiler alert here is, despite getting the temperatures up to 700 degrees Fahrenheit and throwing bags of ice, water, using compression, spot freezing, spot heat, the only way that I was actually able to do any damage to the outer ceramics was pushing it off of a chair and letting it hit the ground. So I do think the reports or the concerns of using ceramic in cold weather, particularly from my experience in testing, are way overblown. But that's not to say that we want to do reckless things inside of our grill. So what could a reckless thing be? And that's shocking your ceramics. You can use, people ask about starting fires. There's a number of different things that you can use for starting your fires, but in the cold winter months, one of the ones that I would avoid is dumping a full hot charcoal chimney. Charcoal can burn up to 1100 degrees Fahrenheit into freezing ice cold ceramics. Outside of that, if you start a fire, whether you're using fire starters, a loop lighter, a grill blazer, grill gun, whatever you're doing, you can continue to do that as you are, just giving a little extra time to bring temperature up more slowly. It's the sudden change that causes the problem. Just like that saying sort of in racing series, where it's not speed that kills, it's stopping suddenly. The same is true in ceramic. It's not the heat or the cold that kills, it's the sudden change from one steady state to another that can cause these problems. So now we've covered 5 mistakes to avoid, and if you have them, how to fix them. Let's go into 5 advantages that are only possible in cold weather like we're having right now. So Mother Nature is on our side for these next few cooks. So the first one that is great to try this time of year is something like cold smoking. In the summer, it's not uncommon to come out and look at my dome gauge and see temperatures already what look like they're up in the 100 to 150 degree Fahrenheit range if they're in direct sunlight. And this is already, before we even started a fire, too hot for something like cold smoking. So doing some cold smoking in the cold weather is a great way to get some hearty, cheesy meals and get some extra smoke flavor on them and be able to take advantage of what's otherwise very difficult to achieve in a very energy efficient heat storing Kamado style grill, where typically our temperatures get a little too hot for things like cold smoking salmon or cold smoking cheese. Another one that is great to do this time of year is something like beef jerky. We don't have to stay as low and cold as cold smoke, so it's a little bit easier, but temperatures in that 150 to 200 degrees Fahrenheit are great for beef jerky. I've got a couple dedicated videos on those if you're interested in beef jerky, as well as a dehydrator. So if you have a couple fresh hot peppers, this time of year is a great time to use your grill as something like a dehydrator. So pop a couple holes in those peppers, put them in for a low and slow smoke, somewhere 150, 180 degrees Fahrenheit is typically what I do mine at. And in a couple hours, you have peppers that are smoky and dehydrated, and you'll be able to preserve those and use them all winter long. And they go great with my next idea, which is things like soups and chilies. So these dehydrated smoky peppers not only add a lot of flavor, they give us an excuse to cook number 3, which is leftover chili. All summer, you might have filled the freezer with little bits of random leftovers, whether they're ribs or pork belly or brisket. Using those up in the winter in soups and chilies is an amazing way to be able to continue using your grill, as well as just get something hearty and warm in the cold weather. Number 4 just happens to conveniently still be in place for me, which is the Dojo, if you happen to have one. Now, the Dojo for me has gone from something that I used to put away and bring out once in a blue moon when I'm using it, but this year I've discovered it's actually an amazing smoking accessory. So if you have one of these, it doesn't have to just be pizza. You can do things like brisket, ribs, pulled pork, you name it. And there's more than just my opinion here. I actually have data using an aeronometer, and I was able to measure over 4 times more airflow coming out of the Dojo than what I got using the slow roller at the exact same temperatures. And this is helping close the gap to something like I have on my offset. If you haven't tried this and you have a Dojo, I would absolutely add that to your cook list in the new year. But enough about the data and the airflow. There's actually another practical benefit to using the Dojo, whether you're using it for smoking or for pizza. This is the fact that it is moving all of that heat that would normally be going out the top of our grill and creating a big warming area. If we were doing a cook right now, I would be toasty warm instead of losing dexterity in all my extremities because of the heat that is being pushed out of the dojo. And so cooking in winter is a lot more enjoyable with a portable heat source. Not all cities allow open air burning where we could have a fire, or I've used my solo stove before to stay nice and toasty. So a great way of getting a little extra heat and not losing feeling in the fingers is to use something like the Dojo. And if you don't have one of those, that leads me into number 5, which is considering dome open cooks. So whether you're searing a steak, doing smash burgers, or if you have a skewer and you want to do chicken thighs, things like that, there's a whole world of open dome cooking. We don't need to use the dome for cooking. We can do open dome cooking. And not only is this a fun way to interact with the fire, one of my favorite things to do, and why I love live fire cooking is being able to interact with the coals, move our food around, and get different results. But in the winter, this is also a great way to stay warm. So it opens up a whole bunch of extra options. And the last little tip, I tried to stick to 5 and 5 here, is just also check your footwear. Things get slippy in the cold and icy weather, and so to make sure that you don't crash and knock yourself out going to and from the kitchen, some extra footwear from experience is a good way to stay safe as well as have fun. I hope that you enjoyed this video. Let me know down in the comments if there's anything else you'd like to see in future videos, or if you got a question, join me in one of my next members live where we can go live and ask questions in a one-on-one sort of one-to-many format versus these pre-recorded videos. But that's it for today. I'm James from Smoking Head Barbecue signing off, and remember, don't be afraid to fire it up all winter long.